Welcome to the debate. The strategic landscape of the Arctic for a long time was seen as this sort of remote, predictable frontier, but now it's dramatically reshaping. As climate change melts the sea ice, new routes, both commercial and military, are opening up, and it's transforming the entire region into a key arena for, well, for great power competition.
Right. And that shifting ice is effectively dissolving the old geopolitical order. It's making the world's largest island, Greenland, not just a feature on a map anymore, but a genuine flashpoint.
Precisely. And so the core question that's really driving our analysis today is this. Should the United States seek full sovereign control over Greenland? And that could be through, say, a purchase, a new treaty, or any other lawful pathway. Now, I'll be arguing that this kind of acquisition is a strategic necessity for U.S. security, for our long-term Arctic strategy, and frankly, for the integrity of our critical supply chains.
And I'm going to argue from the opposite position, that any attempt at a takeover like this fundamentally risks destabilizing our NATO partnership with Denmark. It violates the principles of Greenlandic self-determination, and it just disregards the international norms that prohibit this kind of transactional approach to an ally's sovereignty.
Okay, so to begin, let's quickly define the political status here, because it's complicated, and it's central to the question.
It is. So, Greenland operates under what's called the Unity of the Realm with the Kingdom of Denmark. The Self-Government Act of 2009 grants the Greenlandic authorities, they're known as the Naalakkersuisut, extensive power over most domestic affairs. That includes resource management.
But, and this is a crucial but, the Danish constitution reserves the ultimate authority over foreign policy, security, and defense. That stays with the Danish government and its parliament, the Folketing. This authority is explicitly retained under Section 19 of that Self-Government Act. So what that means is that Copenhagen, not Nuuk, holds the constitutional keys on external defense issues.
And that separation is vital because our whole discussion is legally framed by, on one hand, the principle of self-determination, the right of a people to choose their own future, and on the other, by the bedrock rule of the UN Charter, Article 2.4, which strictly prohibits the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity of any state. So any pathway has to be lawful and, importantly, consensual.
Well, the geopolitical reality dictates that we need to move beyond simply relying on allied goodwill. I mean, with the Arctic ice melting, new global commerce routes are becoming viable. Take the Northwest Passage. It cuts 7,000 kilometers off the Panama Canal route. That necessitates clear U.S. dominance over these strategic choke points to deter our rivals. And Russia is aggressively restoring old Soviet bases right across its northern fleet area. And then there's China, which unilaterally declared itself a near-Arctic state back in 2018 and is now pursuing its polar Silk Road. The existing defense agreements we have, particularly the 1951 treaty, they just don't guarantee the permanent strategic security or the resource access that this new threat environment demands. Lawful, negotiated control is the only way to solidify the operations of Pacific Space Base, our northernmost installation, and to secure the critical minerals we need for our own green transition. We need sovereign continuity of mission, not conditional access.
I see why you feel that urgency, I do. But framing this as requiring acquisition is where I fundamentally disagree. That approach, it treats a core NATO ally and a people moving towards their own self-governance as a piece of real estate. And that move just destabilizes NATO cohesion and directly risks alienating the Greenlandic people. And their agency is absolutely central to any long-term stability in the region. Greenlandic greeters, from their top labor union chair to members of parliament, have repeatedly and clearly said, "We are not for sale." Furthermore, the existing 1951 treaty, it already grants the U.S. the critical rights we need. We control air and ship movements in designated areas. We maintain personnel there. So acquisition seems like a deeply provocative, overreaching solution that risks our international credibility, all while seeking a strategic capability that, we arguably already have through collaboration. I think we have to prioritize respectful partnership over transactional ownership.
Let's move directly into the strategic calculus then.
because the threat context has fundamentally shifted since 1951. Russia's actions, they aren't abstract. They're restoring deep water ports, military airfields that can support strategic bombers. China's Polar Silk Road is a clear dual-use strategy. And in this environment, Piddlefix Space is, well, it's irreplaceable. It's the DoD's eye on the North Pole, crucial for missile warning, missile defense, and space surveillance. So relying on the 1951 treaty, which grants us access but reserves sovereignty to Denmark, that's an unacceptable long-term risk. I mean, what happens if, in a future crisis, the Danish parliament, maybe under different political leadership, places restrictions on our troop rotations or logistical flights? The U.S. needs uninterrupted, sovereign command over this top-of-the-world vantage point to counter these escalating threats.
We need to ensure missile defense operations are insulated from the political changes of another nation, even a close ally.
We need to ensure missile defense operations are insulated from the political changes of another nation, even a close ally. That's an interesting point, though I would frame it very differently. You're proposing that we undermine a robust, successful treaty structure because of a hypothetical worst-case political scenario that might happen decades from now. The source material confirms Piddlefix is operated by the 821st Space Group because of agreements between the U.S. and Denmark on mutual defense. The framework is already mutually binding. The 1951 agreement explicitly allows Denmark the right to use the defense area in cooperation with the U.S. for the defense of Greenland and the entire North Atlantic. So this isn't conditional access, it's shared security under the NATO umbrella. We have continuous collaboration. Just last year, U.S. Space Command leadership was meeting with Major General Soren Andersen, who commands Denmark's Joint Arctic Command. Acquisition isn't just redundant, it signals a profound strategic distrust in Copenhagen. And that could actually encourage them to seek non-NATO solutions for Arctic stability.
But the threat isn't hypothetical. Our competitors are operationalizing it every single day. And that inherent political risk, however small you think it is magnified by the second issue, sovereignty and Greenland's path to independence.
And that brings us to the core legal conflict here, self-determination. Acquisition, even through a generous negotiated purchase, has to address Greenlandic sovereignty. The Self-Government Act of 2009 provides a precise multi-step path toward full independence. It involves a decision by the people, a negotiated agreement between Nuuk and Copenhagen, consent from the Greenlandic Parliament, endorsement by a binding referendum in Greenland, and then, finally, consent from the Danish Parliament. Any external deal that tries to bypass this process, which requires the consent of the people whose land it is, or relies on economic coercion, is just unacceptable. It would violate the spirit of international law, especially given the clear public rejection from Greenlandic leaders. To just ignore all these layers of consent is, well, it's to create a new international grievance.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because the security requirements of Piddlefix are simply non-negotiable for U.S. and NATO homeland defense. My position is strictly confined to lawful pathways, a purchase, a new permanent treaty, something like that. Not force, which is rightly prohibited. But the immense strategic importance of that base means it has to be insulated from regional political risks. While Denmark handles foreign and defense policy today, we have to anticipate the future. If Greenland eventually achieves independence through that legal path you just outlined, the new sovereign state would gain complete control over all defense assets. So lawful acquisition isn't about undermining self-determination, it's about guaranteeing the continuity of an indispensable missile warning asset. It prevents it from becoming a bargaining chip in future independence talks, or worse, vulnerable to competitors who might offer better deals for resource rights.
Are confining ourselves to lawful means, then acquisition must be consensual, which means Greenland would have to agree to sell its own future, which they have explicitly rejected. You're trying to mitigate a future political risk by creating an immediate diplomatic crisis with Denmark, our most reliable Arctic ally, and you're directly disrespecting the sovereignty of a democratic partner. The principle of sovereignty dictates that we honor the processes they already have in place, regardless of how inconvenient they are for U.S. strategic planning. We should be investing in the alliance, not trying to strip its assets.
I would argue the best way to secure the alliance is to secure its vital assets permanently, and that calculus only gets more pressing when we consider the mineral wealth that's under the island.
Right.
Acquisition guarantees U.S. supply chain security, which has become a core defense imperative. Greenland's mountains hold enormous deposits of resources that are crucial for the green transition and military tech. I'm talking rare earth elements, graphite, copper, titanium. Greenland's own internal strategy acknowledges that the price and supply of these minerals are often subject to, and I'm quoting, political conditions. Sovereign control allows the U.S. to stabilize this risk immediately. Mining is incredibly capital-intensive. It takes, an average of 16 years to bring a site online globally. If the U.S. acquires the territory, we can leverage the economic access created by climate change, secure the shortest trade routes, and get these indispensable resources without being reliant on potentially unstable or competitive foreign partners. Partnership is good, but ownership guarantees stability.
That's a compelling argument, sure. But have you actually looked at Greenland's own mineral resources strategy for 2025-2029? Greenland isn't just sitting there passively. They're actively working to attract investment. They're pursuing partnerships with the EU on sustainable value chains. They're participating in the U.S.-led Minerals Security Partnership Forum. And more importantly, their strategy emphasizes social sustainability and local anchoring. The Nalakar has explicitly recognized that establishing mines in remote areas contribute significantly to Greenland's CO2 emissions unless large-scale green energy like hydropower is implemented first. A U.S.-driven extraction-first model risks prioritizing our immediate geopolitical need over Greenland's explicit goals of careful environmental protection. And that would certainly alienate the local population, whose culture and economy depend heavily on fishing and hunting. You can't secure the land without the long-term consent of the people living on it.
Well, responsible extraction is perfectly compatible with sovereign control, especially given U.S. commitments to robust environmental standards. But that responsibility hinges on reliable investment. Relying solely on Greenland's ability to attract sufficient non-Chinese investment over the next decade, under volatile political conditions, that's a strategic gamble. Sovereign U.S. backing stabilizes that investment environment immediately. It ensures those critical minerals reach the democratic world responsibly and reliably.
And who defines responsibly if the local sovereign entity, Greenland, is stripped of its constitutional ability to enforce its own standards? Greenland has already established an arm's-length principle, separating its environmental agency from its development ministry. Full acquisition risks dissolving that necessary check and prioritizing the speed of extraction over long-term community benefit.
Greenland's right to self-determination is vital, of course, but it has to be balanced against the existential mutual defense needs of NATO. The 1951 Defense of Greenland Treaty was signed precisely because Pituffik is indispensable for U.S. and NATO missile warning. That is a strategic fact that remains true regardless of local political preferences or the not-for-sale rhetoric. Security continuity requires a change in the status quo.
I just come at it from a different way. Sovereignty is not some variable to be balanced away. It's a fundamental right. It's the foundation of international order. The ultimate authority over defense and security already rests in Copenhagen with our ally. And the 1951 agreement explicitly grants the U.S. the right to station personnel and control landings and takeoffs, which means we already have sufficient strategic continuity under the current framework, without demanding full acquisition and alienating two key democratic partners.
I believe the evidence points to a single conclusion. The geopolitical stakes in the Arctic, driven by new trade routes and the global demand for critical minerals, mean the U.S. simply cannot afford strategic ambiguity when it comes to Pituffik. Lawful acquisition, or a new, permanently binding agreement, offers the only guaranteed path to protect Pituffik's crucial missile defense missions and secure those resources against determined competitors like Russia and China. It's an imperative driven by a shifting climate and great power dynamics that demands sovereign control.
I see it from a very different perspective. Any attempt to acquire Greenland disrupts the delicate constitutional relationship within the unity of the realm and directly affronts the agency of the Greenlandic people. And they are already charting their own path for sustainable resource management. Security cooperation is already robust and effective today. defined by the 1951 agreement, and it works best when it's founded on respect for sovereignty and international law, not by treating allies and their territories as cheap transactions on a strategic balance sheet. Acquisition is unnecessary, it's dangerous, and it's destabilizing.
We presented, I think, detailed evidence-based arguments here concerning the conflict between strategic necessity, resource management, and the principles of sovereignty in this rapidly changing theater.
And ultimately, the question rests on whether that perceived security imperative of a global power outweighs the fundamental principles of sovereignty and self-determination for a strategic ally, a partner who is actively working toward its own future.
So, the debate leaves us with a stark choice between guaranteeing the immediate, long-term security demands of a global power and respecting the existing constitutional and sovereign rights of an increasingly self-determined partner.
Exactly. And understanding this material requires acknowledging both the vital strategic value of Pituffik Space Ace and the clearly defined multi-step process Greenland has laid out for its future, including its own economic plans which prioritize sustainability and local consent.